Okay, it's 6:05. I'd like to call the meeting of the Finance Buildings and Grounds to order. Could I have approval of the meeting minutes from last meeting, please?
So moved.
Yes. Okay, the minutes are approved. So from here, we're going to move on to the presentations for this evening. We're going to start with the presentation of proposed facilities budget from Mr. Shelgren.
Good evening, everybody. So I'm going to be presenting the proposed budget for the facilities department. Before I go into it, just a brief overall what the facilities budget covers. That's basically everything to keep the buildings running. It's from anything from the utility bills, landscaping, any kind of maintenance work, contracts we have, and that compromise what we have total as far as like buildings that we take care of is around 1,031,000 square feet throughout the district, and we take care of about 250 acres. That's active acres that we take care of, and we have additional acres from land that we own that we lease out. That's not included in that. So on the first page of the budget, so the first section is plant services. Within this section, it's everything stays the same as it was last year, other than a slight increase for meals and refreshments, and that's for our staff training. We have monthly training for our housekeepers and maintenance, so we have increased some of that training, so that covers that. But everything else stays the same. There's within this, there's travel, general supplies, which is that's mainly comprised of HVAC filters, staff uniforms. Software is our FMX software we use for work order systems, PM work orders, inventory. Books are our training literature that we use for training. And capital equipment, replacement of capital equipment is mainly housekeeping equipment, vacuums, scrubbers, that kind of thing. So like I said, that section stayed the same other than a slight increase in meals and refreshments. The building services section, we have an increase in electricity, and that's actually the biggest change in this budget presentation. If you recall, I think it was about a month and a half ago, we had some anticipated numbers for our electricity increase from our Provident, our broker. And at that time, they were expecting about a 44.5% increase. The numbers came in from what they do is we go in like in aggregate with other school districts, and it goes out to bid. So the numbers came in a lot better than we expected. It actually came in at 17, a little over 17%, 17.31 versus the expected 45. So that was a huge help. Along with that, we're now starting to see some savings from the Giza. If you recall, we went through and replaced all the lights with LEDs. We're about 95% done with that now. We only have a couple sections left. It's mainly like the auditoriums and a few other special sections where we're just having a hard time scheduling folks to get in there to do the work. We don't want to impact any kind of plays and stuff like that are going on. So a couple of those items will probably linger until the beginning of summer. We can get in and finish that work. But as the Giza, the anticipated savings for this year is going to be $75,820 on the utilities. So we don't have any real numbers yet. So we need like a full year to actually benchmark it to see if the savings were what the engineers anticipated. But that is what was presented when the Giza project was approved. So that's what we're hoping to see. So it's between the positive numbers coming back from the utility bid and the Giza, we were able to get the number. We were able to bring that number down quite a bit. So now it's a $65,000 increase for the year, which is about 10.8% versus the 44 we were expecting a while back. So Water and sewage, that went up slightly, and there's a couple reasons for that is mainly the district service center. We used to be on a well, and we had a water treatment plant. So when we renovated that building, the plant was demolished, we tied into the public sewer, and we're also on public water because we had to add a sprinkler system to the building, so that required us to tie into the public water. So now that's part of the increase, and another slight part of the increase is water bills went up slightly. So, and anywhere we have public water, the bills went up a little bit. So, the maintenance section, most of that is our contracts. We have contract with like sprinkler inspections. We have HVAC PM work for stuff that we can't handle in-house, repairs, all that kind of thing. So, you know, we're seeing increases in costs with that with all of our vendors. So we pushed them down as much as we can, but we are going to see a slight increase there. And then natural gas, it went down a little bit. So we're saving $10,000 over last year. And that is also part of the energy bid that went out. And that's through our vendor Provident. So that went down a little bit. The next section is ground services. Kind of self-explanatory. That's snow removal, lawn care, and lawn care services. That's just the mowing part of it, and then repair and maintenance. That's anything outside of mowing. That's trees, taking care of the fields, the ball fields, anything like that. Mulching. So we're keeping all that the same as last year. No change. And the last part is plant services. That's supplies for our in-house folks. So carpentry, electrical, HVAC, and then the last item is janitorial supplies. That's all of our consumables like paper towels and toilet paper and soap and that kind of things, floor wax, anything to keep the district running. So so that is the last section. So between last year's budget and this year's budget, it's the difference is 3.44% increase. So any questions?
Yeah, I have a couple questions. Some of them might not be the most smartest questions. I'm doing best here. Where you talked about capital equipment, about the you know, just housekeeping type of things. Why is that termed capital? What does that mean? I'm assuming that does not have anything to do with the capital budget.
No, it doesn't. It's a good question. Do you want me to jump in there, Mike?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and let you jump in.
Yeah. The only reason I'm jumping in is it's an accounting code
Okay.
requirement from PDE. So if it's going to be $5,000 or more, it's considered capital, even if you're in your general fund operating budget. So some things are funded through the general fund operating budget, which equipment like housekeeping equipment and those kinds of things are, versus some of the bigger items like boilers and.
Okay, but nothing else on this has that code. You know what I mean? Like,
This would be where anything in the facilities department, if it was a capital item, meaning equipment,
okay, equipment
that's
type
where it would
items.
be.
Okay.
That's where it would be coded.
So anything that is equipment oriented that you would buy that's over 5,000 would fit into this
Correct.
category. Okay.
Correct.
Okay, also GIZA, what does that stand for?
Guaranteed Energy Savings Act.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, and then, it's just, this is snow removal. Obviously, we didn't really have any snow this year, so I'm wondering, did we spend $175,000 on snow removal this year, or did we not spend any, like, because I see the proposed budget is also 175, so,
No, we did not. And that number comes up from an average over the years from history. We've had, I've been here 9 years, and there's been multiple years where we went over that, where we had like severe storms, severe winters where we moved a lot of snow. So it's just based on an average is where that number
okay,
comes
so
from.
next year's proposal is an average of what typically we would see, not
Yeah.
based on anything, okay.
So, and I'm glad you mentioned capital as well. I forgot to mention that the capital budget is not being presented tonight. That is being presented at a future meeting. So anything within this facilities budget does not cover capital projects like construction projects.
Mike, can I just follow up on Kathy's question related to the snow removal? So if we didn't spend that 175, is that rolled over to next year's budget? Or, so what happened to the 175 we didn't spend?
Let's go.
Sure. It's actually a budget savings then for this year. So we budget similar amounts in landscaping and snow removal. Some years, we have lots of snow, and we use the snow removal budget for that, and landscaping likewise. Other years, when we have less snow, we may use then some of that money to prune the trees or do some of the other more expensive type items that we don't get to every year, but we only do that when we have like a light snow year. So there will be some budget savings. And then per board policy, any net savings at the end of the year goes into fund balance for just a certain percentage, and then the rest transfers over to the capital.
Okay, got it.
That makes sense?
Yep. And then just out of curiosity, so your numbers for next year's budget are pretty closely mirroring what they were for this past year's budget. So are your expenses for this current year coming in pretty much right on the dollar that you budgeted for? Because I'm just like, I mean, it seems like you're pretty much keeping the same budget for next year that you had for this year.
I say it's very close.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very close.
And Mr. Doherty, I could also add, when I look at the trend in his budget, like for example, for 21-22, the actual expenditures were $2.99 million. So it's relatively consistent, other than those ups and downs for weather-related type things, or if there's a big issue that we didn't anticipate.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions from the committee? Any other questions from the board at large? Okay.
Thank you.
We'll move on to our second presentation. Mr. Gray will provide us the transportation budget.
I think I've met most of you, but not all. Thank you for having me tonight. So let's jump right in. I'm going to hit the highlights, I think. And then if you have any questions, of course, you can feel free to ask. I don't mind if you ask questions as I go. So I kind of operate that way. So if you've got a question, fire away. First, I want to, I mean, we haven't gotten to that slide yet, but I want to address the students served. That number is not necessarily total enrollment, but the number of students that we actually transport. So I'll get a list from the non-public schools with 40, 50 kids on there. I might actually transport 30. So these numbers are, and this is, I think, the third slide, maybe the second slide. Those numbers are the students that we actually transport, not the total number of students enrolled in any of the schools we do. And on that note, as of this morning, we transport, in addition to our 7 public schools, to 65 other non-public schools, charter schools, special ed programs, work programs. So we're putting on some miles. So we'll go right into it. The first slide is the, thank you. I bounce around a lot, so I apologize. Other professional services, that $20,000 last year was the transportation efficiency study, so hopefully we don't do that again. But I hope you all got a copy of that. So there's the $20,000 savings right off the top. Maintenance services, we've gone from 3 vans to 1 van, so it's in relatively good shape. Linda takes immaculate care of that vehicle, so we've reduced the number to $6,000 for a $2,000 savings for our personal transportation vehicle. Now we get to the good stuff. Contracted services through GNL. Our contract basically states that it's either going to be the Act 1 indexed or capped at 3.5. I think it was 4.1% this year, so we're capping it at 3.5. So everything GNL related has gone up 3.5%, whether it be the midday, the to and from, driver rates, aid rates, all went up 3.5%. So that's part of our contract with GNL. So we've gone from, oh, that's a $277,987 increase in our contracted carrier rate. That goes for the midday as well. I budget the same amount of midday buses. Midday buses are TCHS, our tech school students, early intervention. That's the only midday transportation that we do. Let me see anything else on here that's GNL related. I don't think so. Fuel, we got super lucky, I think. Diesel only went up 26 cents a gallon. Gasoline went down 7 cents a gallon. So I had anticipated spending a lot more in fuel for this upcoming school year. We budgeted the same amount. 189,000 gallons for diesel, 30,000 gallons for gasoline. We buy that in a consortium with the county, so we basically go out for bid for the lowest price. I can't remember who the award, PAPCO, Petroleum Traders, it's one of the two. Somebody merged, I can't remember, but we locked in, so we're guaranteed, and that is on the other page, we're guaranteed 286.54 for diesel and 242.22 for gasoline. So we'll pay that price throughout the course of the school year. I believe that starts August 1st. Liability insurance went up $2,500. Our communication stays the same. Travel, that's for mileage and whatnot, that stays the same. General office supplies, we don't need a whole lot. So that stays about the same. Our bus conduct software went up $150, but I think that's integral to the system. I mean, that's how we write up disciplinary issues on the bus. So it's all automated, it's all online. It's a really cool service, and it goes right to the principal. So that went up for the first time in 6 years, at least 6 years. So I believe that's money well spent. Dues and fees are pretty standard across the board. That does not change. Staff development. Now, there's an increase there, but we do have a new person in our transportation department that I'd love you all to meet. She's a transportation logistics position. So she comes from Unionville Chadds Ford. She's got all the credentials. She knows our routing software. She's been in transportation for many years. So hopefully I'll get the opportunity to meet her. But along with her goes staff development, software training, and training on all of the items that we utilize in transportation. The next page. Oh, student, like I mentioned earlier, these numbers are actual students transported, not total enrollment. So I see slight increases overall. I think that the non-public school students are slow to come back. You can see that number's much lower than we've had in previous years. Tech school, Cat Pickering holds pretty steady around 110. Early intervention is the long shot. So I've gone from, even before here, I think there were 23 students at one point. When I first started, there were 50 or more. So that number's dwindled significantly in the last few years, and that's our midday transportation. So there could be fluctuation in that number for our midday transportation depending on how many early intervention students we have. They come from the county. I have no idea until I get that list. So anywhere from 50 to 8. So that was a tough one, but I try to route those students at the midday as efficiently as possible. Charter school students, there's not a whole lot. I think we actually have 2 co-collegium upper this year, and the majority are Renaissance Academy. They're just closer in proximity to our school district. And that includes the 10 miles beyond our school district. So we're putting on some miles to Malvern Prep and some other schools that are on the further reaches. And here are the proposed costs for the upcoming school year per the contract. Everything went up 3.5%. And I mentioned earlier the fuel prices that we're locked in for the remainder of the school year. Well, starting August 1st for the 23-24 school year. I think in total, there's a 6.31 difference, an increase in this upcoming school year's budget versus the previous school year. Or our current school year, I'm sorry. Oh, I should mention that I did budget for 94 buses versus the 92 that we have. So there's the 2 additional buses, which makes that number jump. So that's in preparation, that I have drivers. Anybody have
I have
any?
some questions. On the students, what's the difference between non-public and approved private?
Approved private schools are some of the schools like Camp Hill or some of the outside of Devereaux, Delaware Valley Friends. There are some non-public schools in our definition are Pope John Paul, St. Teresa's, the Catholic schools. The approved private schools are placements.
Okay. Also, I was just curious about, we've had this issue where we're 10 buses short or whatever, drivers short, and we're combining runs and doing whatever we need to do. If we're not running 10 buses every day or whatever, have we saved any money on that? do we get any break from GNL because of not utilizing those drivers or?
So we pay a daily rate.
Yeah.
So if that bus doesn't run, so we haven't had a bus 26, well, we might have a bus 26 3 days out of 5 for the week. So we do not get billed for 26 on the days that it does not run. So
Okay.
there is savings across the board. I couldn't tell you what that number is, but if the bus doesn't run, because we pay a daily rate, if the bus doesn't run that day, there are savings. 280, 290, 40 a day.
Okay, so I'm just like looking at, so the final budget that you have written down here for contracted carriers, that's obviously them. And then the proposed budget, does that final budget take into account the fact that you had savings there? And
This
then the proposed
20
budget is assuming all buses run all year? Or how does that work?
The 22-23 school year is assuming that all of the buses are running every day. There will be savings there. For this current school year,
Yeah,
yes, there will be savings.
okay, so that, but
This is
that's not
assuming that
shown.
every bus ran 181 days.
Okay,
Right, the budget assumes that every bus is running and that we're able to get drivers. Our goal is to be able to get drivers for next year. We, obviously, we
Right.
can't guarantee that. But we're adding a couple of buses in too because we actually want to decrease the ride time. So our challenge, just like every other school right now, is finding the drivers to drive the school buses.
Right.
Or even just to be the substitutes as well. So that we can, so that when they take a day off or they have a medical leave, there's somebody there to pick up the run.
right. So I know you said you didn't know what the number was, and that's fine, but can you give me some sort of ballpark on this final budget, 4,835 and change there? Is that going to be reduced by
Oh, boy.
like a minimal amount, or do you think it's going to be significant? Or, could you guess?
I would say minimal. I would say minimal. I wouldn't say, I wouldn't say $250,000. I'd say maybe if we're lucky, 100,000, which
And
is
we can look at where we are year to date, and we can maybe project out to give you an idea, if you want. would
Yeah,
like
I'm
us
just
to do
curious
that.
about
Sure.
whether or
It's a
not.
tricky
Because,
one.
when you suffer like this, you want to have some benefit,
Absolutely.
you know? Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions on transportation from the committee or from the board?
Under driver's wages, is that what we pay them and then GNL pays them also?
That's what they bill. That's what they bill per our contract
Okay.
for a driver's wage.
So they bill us that?
Yeah, I don't know what they,
Okay.
that's changed multiple times in the last year and a half, so I'm not exactly sure what their going wage is, but that's what that's the bill per the contract. That's what we pay them for their driver rate. It's a driver rate versus wage. Maybe we should change that. It does say wage, but I don't know.
What do the drivers get though?
Right, so the drivers will get what GNL pays them, so this is the
the
all-in
driver
cost, so it
fee, yeah.
includes benefits and payroll taxes and et cetera.
So when we want to, get more bus drivers and we want to do incentives, how is that calculated?
Is that in here somewhere where those incentives that we,
Well, hopefully we'll use the savings that we have to provide the incentives. I mean, that's the way I would look at it, because if we're needing to provide incentives, that means that we're not fully operational. So I wouldn't look at that as an overall cost, other than when we come to you and say, our driver rates are not competitive, GNL is not able to be competitive with Craft or whoever is down the street. Here's the rate, here are the rates. GNL is asking for an increase for the drivers. What we have done in the past, for example, like post-COVID, is we have said, well, GNL, you need to pick up a portion of that increase, and we'll pick up a portion, and then we do an addendum that we bring to you as a board to approve. So we wouldn't do anything without bringing it to the board.
and, we've had this discussion about how all the districts are having these same problems with driver shortages and things. And then we've also had people in the community asking us if we're paying a competitive. So how does GNL rank now with Kraft and whoever else is around here?
Right now, when I looked at the most recent survey, they were about mid, depending on which neighbor you're looking at. So we've asked them again, last meeting that we had, Chris and I asked them to take a look at your competitors, because we want to make sure that as school is winding down, that if there are items such as retention bonuses in order to retain, you'll get X dollars if you come back in the fall and you stay until whatever date. So we're looking at retention, and we're also looking at driver rates, but we would bring anything to you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Some for the future. Is there a way to calculate like how much we pay per student to bus them to private versus how much we pay per student? I said the long run. You know, is there a way to figure out what it costs per student to go one way versus come to our,
Oh, sure.
okay?
Yeah, I mean, I break it down by the daily rate. So if it's 10 students on a non-public, a 72 passenger bus, and we're paying $300, it's $30 a day for each student, you know, multiplied by the 100, whatever days they're in, 177 to 181. So it's easy enough to find out.
So I would
So
think
we'd
it'd
use
be, you know, significantly more.
Oh, certainly.
So
It's almost three.
To get
wow,
that figure
yeah.
may be helpful to the public to see, you know, the disparity with our district
Oh,
versus.
absolutely. I mean, I do have non-public schools where there's one family, so it's one stop. Might be 7 kids, but it's one stop. So, yeah, it's significant. Absolutely. I try to do the school, well, it saves us a couple bucks, but I try to do the schools that have 7 or less in a van. So we're not paying the $300 daily rate, but we're paying the van daily rate. So it's worked out in the past. For like Delaware Valley Friends, I think there's maybe 7 students. We use a van rather than a $300, well, $290 school bus, and wherever I can. If we had more vans.
Yeah, I was just going to ask that
And
question.
so we don't need a CDL driver for vans, so we're trying to be creative. So wherever we can, I use a van. Collegium had a bus at one point. I needed that CDL driver for a non-public school, so we do it in a van now. So I don't need a CDL driver.
How many vans could you use to
As many
reduce
as they
our?
could get. They don't have a lot. I think they have 7. They have 7 vans on lot with maybe a spare.
But you're saying you don't pay you don't pay G&L for those vans? Those are school district vans?
No,
they're G&L vans.
Yeah,
So it's just
their rate
cheaper.
is, yeah, it's on here. They're around $200 a day, $220 a day versus
Okay,
the 3.
so it's still not cheap. But I'm just curious, our school district vans do other things, obviously. We only have 2, now we went down from 3 to 2 or whatever.
We have one, they've come to the athletic department, so they do trips in those. They sporting events and trips in the vans that are here at the high school campus. So I've got one in my transportation department we use for early intervention. Because the bell time at TCHS for early intervention doesn't mesh with the TCH bus. So they get out at 2:03 and early intervention gets out at 3:15. So I don't have time to drop them off and go back. So I use a van for that, our van for that.
Well, I'm just curious about whether or not, I mean, we've all, people have talked for years and years about, oh, can't you just own your own buses the way Unionville does or what, and all that? And I have no idea what that even would entail. But have we, well, what do you think about that?
I would never do it again. I was at North Penn for 4 years before.
do it.
So the average, when I was there, excuse me, the average contracted bus at that time was about 50,000. When you add benefits and PSERs and everything into a district employee to drive a school-owned bus, 75 per employee, plus the cost of the bus. A brand-new bus is push 100,000. An electric bus, I just found out the other day, was $334,000. So,
Oh,
yeah, that's gonna be a stretch.
okay. All right,
But
well,
they don't come with
okay, so
cords.
maybe that idea is not a good one, but I'm just wondering if, I'm just wondering though, is there any way to utilize vans for these runs? Obviously these private schools and these places that only have few students, it's so expensive to take an entire school bus or even a van that's run by G&L. Is there any investigating our own vans with our own drivers to expand the fleet of vans that we drive just for that purpose? And whether that's even worth investigating.
Right. I will say that Chris and I have talked about this, and we've looked at, do we want to supplement GNL's contract? Because there is nothing in GNL's contract that says we can't do that.
Right.
We are not beholden if we need additional transportation services. So what we are actually doing is looking into maybe a supplemental contract. Not that they're easy to come by, because none of the companies can find drivers right now. But if we could maybe supplement those services, we might be able to do better. I would still recommend contracting those services out. Just the
Insurance.
combination of cost and liability, I think it would be more beneficial for the district to still contract out that service, other than a couple of vans, that we might need just to pick up holes here and there.
Right. I mean, they do fill a gap for the golf team or, sports teams with a smaller participation, those sort of things, or field trips where, I think they use them quite a bit for like life skills trips and that sort of thing, or science fairs or competitions on a smaller level. Yeah, so we do that quite a bit. We've got ideas for when the contract expires in 2025. Let's talk about it. I like the idea of breaking the contract apart and bidding possibly 3 different sections of our student population. So we might say, here's the specs for all of our special needs students, and here's non-public students and public school students. So maybe we could possibly end up with 3 contractors versus 1, which might give them a better opportunity or ability to staff those buses or have drivers for those specific categories. So there's a lot of things that we can do. We're kind of in it till 2025. And we do use an outside contractor for sports trips and field trips. And they've been pretty phenomenal, so.
Well, sorry, maybe just clarify this. So if we are ending this year and we still are not filling our buses or, getting enough buses, would that institute a possible trying to find another, supplier for additional contracts? Or what's going to push you to do that instead of just keep limping along like this as we are, as far as someone besides GNL?
We're already in discussions with another contractor. So I want you to know that behind the scenes, we're working towards a better school year for next year. I can't guarantee anything. We're doing what we can to try to supplement services. You're welcome.
I just had one quick question. The bus traffic camera, is that part of this budget or is that somewhere else?
The bus patrol, the stop arm cameras,
Yes.
that's free to us. So.
But isn't there don't we make some money off of that in certain
I don't think we're gonna
situations?
make any money on that. Apparently, the money that we make rolls back into the program to keep the program moving forward. So I'm not sure how the
Okay.
contract was rewritten, but I do know that if there was money that was made from the tickets that were generated, it rolls back into the program to lease the equipment beyond 5 years. Is that how? I know there's been a snafu a little bit with the
Right,
with the
and maybe
citations
this
right
would be
now.
a good opportunity to update the board on where we are with that too. Because there was some legal interpretation with the citations, the Pennsylvania State Police has stopped their participation in that program statewide. So that's kind of on hold until they work through the legal pieces of that. So we did meet with Judge, and we should have it all worked out, hopefully, and they'll have it worked out in time for us to start the new year with the cameras all together. Doesn't mean we aren't going to start installing them, and we'll let people know when we do that. But it's doubtful that we'll actually make money on that program, because if we do not meet the minimum number of citations, which you do, and we're not going to meet the minimum number of citations. So it really just keeps this at a zero cost for the school district.
Okay.
Okay, does that make sense?
Yep, that makes sense. Okay, third time. Any more questions for transportation? Going once, going twice. Okay, thank you. Our final operational cost center budget presentation today will be the proposed business services budget by Ms. Polinsky.
Hi, everybody. Business services budget. So this is the second largest cost center that we're reviewing. Salaries and benefits, of course, are the largest cost center. The reason that this cost center is so large is because it houses our fund transfers to capital projects and also to debt service fund. It also includes the budgetary reserve, and it has the district's general property and liability insurance in here, and then all of the rest of the financial operations of the district. So jumping into the budget, I'm just going to go over some of the larger changes. The first one is a $7,000 increase to the tax collection services. That's a good thing. That's based on the extra collections that we're getting not Berkheimer, sorry. Keystone's doing a really great job with their tax collections, and so this increase is attributed to that. The next largest increase is almost $52,000 for our general property and liability insurance. That also includes cyber. And I think you'll remember last week, Mr. San Francisco talked about some of the cyber issues and rates that we're paying and what we're doing internally to try and mitigate some of those costs. We do meet with our agent or broker a few times a year, and these are the latest revised numbers that you're seeing here, the $52,000 increase. Jumping down then to the fund transfers for capital projects, there's a $30,748 increase. That is in accordance with board policy that we transfer the value of $1 million over to the capital projects. The next change then is debt service, is a decrease of $5,026, and that is because we try to keep our debt funded as level as possible to try to mitigate any tax impacts on that. Finally, the budget reserve is increasing by $30,729. That is also due to board policy, where we set aside a 1% of the next year's expenditure budget for that category. Overall, we're only experiencing a 0.91% increase in this cost center, which is great. Any questions on this exciting topic?
Super exciting. Can you remind me how you calculate 1 mil?
Sure, so it's based, the millage is based, I guess you could say the tax increases are based on 1 mil of real estate taxes. So I don't know, Beth, if you want to jump in here, but we are at, I would have to actually go, I want to say we're at 32 or 33 mils per se. So you're going to take the revenue and you're going to divide that to get the mill, the value per mill.
Okay.
We can send you the calculation if
So
you
the
would like.
entire revenue of all the property taxes collected,
The-
then,
The revenue of the local property taxes, not all of the property, not transfer or not. So it would be the local property taxes.
and then so obviously the millage difference was 30,000 because you're collecting more revenue then, right? And
That
so,
act, the mill will go up based on the value of the property taxes and the actual tax increase too. Right? Because that has an impact.
okay, I see. Okay. Yeah, if you just put that, send that to me sometime so I can just store it someplace and then never ask that question again. Thank you.
Did we see residents taking advantage of the senior tax relief
We're
program
starting
this
to
year?
now. It was very slow in the beginning of the year, but it's starting to pick up a little bit now.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions on the business services budget presentation? Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Hermanis, if you don't mind, I'm actually going to ask Mrs. Polinsky to stay up there and provide us with an update on the overall budget and where we are right now.
Okay,
Okay?
well, that's our next topic, so
It
that's
is,
great.
exactly. I just want you to throw it over to me. I'm throwing it over to
Agenda item 4.01 is the proposed budget update. And Ms. Polinsky,
Thank
you
you.
can have the floor.
Thank you. So I'm just going to highlight the changes from what Mrs. Crumrine expanded on last week. Just real quickly on slide number 3, the schedule, we are following the schedule. However, the only change, and Mr. Shelgren alluded to this earlier, is that capital will be part of the April 3rd working session. Okay, and then I'm going to skip, nothing else changed, until slide 10. And this is a good change. So under local, you'll remember last week, our projected tax increase was 2.7%. We are now down to 1.75%. So that's a very good change. Slide 11 is going to explain to us how we were able to lower that in 2 areas. The first one is a change to the administrative support cost centers. There's a roughly $200,000 decrease there, all in business services. And then dropping down to total personnel costs, there's a $626,000 decrease there. That is made up of salaries, which is about a sixth of that number, and the rest are benefits. That's based on us recalculating and revising figures based on the more current data that we have now than we had a few months ago when we started this process in developing that budget. So those two changes there comprise the difference and brings us down to the 1.7% tax increase compared to, the 2.1 before, no, sorry, the 2.7 last week. Millage rate would then go for 23-24 would be 34.5237. And then finally on slide 12, a graph depicting our proposed 23-24 increase of 1.75% compared to the column all the way to the right in purple, that is the Act 1 index allowable 4.1%. So as you can see, we're well under the index. Are there any questions on that?
I had a question on the staffing. Are you aware of retirements now where you would bring in, obviously, individuals with less experience making less money than retiring professionals?
We're not aware of all of the retirements right now. We've received a few, but per the contract, I believe the deadline is in April, right? In order for them.
That could even go down more.
It could. It could. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We're constantly fine tuning that. But April will be where the buck stops. The end of April or when in April? April 3rd, actually. Well, mid-April, but April 3rd, we will be presenting the proposed final budget. It doesn't mean if there are some significant savings, we would pass them through when we actually bring the budget to you at the full April board meeting. That's where you would acknowledge receipt of it. But on April 3rd's working session, that's where we plan to show you the final proposed budget. As of that point in time, we'll show you the 3-year projections, the sustainability of the budget, and the capital budget.
Is the revenue section taking into account the tax appeals that we're going to take a hit on for next year?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it is. And we actually have some in our, and we'll share this on April 3rd as well. We actually, when we closed our books as of June 22, we reserved a piece of that to help offset some of the future revenue loss over time.
And people can appeal their taxes at any time, can they not? Like individual homeowners?
Really, they need to do that through August for that particular year.
Okay.
So there really is a deadline, because then, you appeal and then it goes to the courthouse and they process it and then they issue us notices.
Okay, thanks.
Can you explain, so when you're talking about like leftover money, basically money that wasn't spent, and then when it hits a certain percent, it goes into the capital fund, or something that you were explaining along those lines, where do we see, like, does that ever get added into this budget, and where would we see that?
The budget is the estimate for what we believe we're going to spend, like, for example, for 23-24. If we have budget savings, so for example, that contingency, it's a budgeted line item of contingency, because maybe something will happen and we may be over budget, so we have contingency. If we actually have budget savings, then there's 2 board policies, and I can send you the policies just so that you can become familiar with those. There are 2 board policies. One that states we currently transfer over 1 mil of real estate taxes. Automatically, it's built into the budget to help fund, it's the technology and the facilities piece, kind of split $1 million apiece. The other policy states that if there are any budget savings, so when we go to close the books for 23-24, if we have budget savings, then they are transferred beyond a certain amount. We reserve up to 5%, but anything above and beyond that is automatically transferred into the capital reserve fund in order to help fund future capital projects, so that when we do have future capital projects, it helps mitigate any tax impact. Does that make sense?
It does, so then that's on top of what we already put into it every year.
Correct.
Okay.
And we are in a rebuilding phase, just to be honest with you, because we did build, we did the two recent construction projects, East Coventry and East Vincent. They were planned expenditures utilizing cash from that fund. So our cash position in that fund is lower than it has been in a long time, subsequent to the construction of East Coventry Elementary School. So we are in a rebuilding phase for that capital fund.
When you said contingency, is that the 1% you were talked about that just, okay, okay. And so that is a board policy that we just save that and we keep it for whatever might pop up during the year?
Correct, and then if it isn't used, it's transferred over to the capital.
To capital,
reserve.
okay.
I'll happily send you those policies and board line at the end of this week, just so that everybody knows what they are.
And this budget still assumes the state funding level that we are hopeful we will
Yes,
maintain.
it includes $1.2 million increase for state funding.
And we will not know that, to be truthful, until after we pass our budget.
Pretty much, yes. We're following it closely,
Right, okay.
and we'll keep you posted. So we have contingency built into our budget. So there are all kinds of things that could come up. Hopefully, it'll be relatively close, but we'll see.
Do we have any other questions from the committee or from the board at large on our budget update? Okay, at this time, I'd like to open up for some public comment or questions. If you have any questions, please state your name and township of residence, and we'll do live questions first, followed by web. Ms. McCreary, if you could use the microphone.
Will you guys continue to look into the bus driver situation? Because my information is the highest amount that a bus driver is paid is $21.21. And that is much less than anywhere else around. Plus, about 75% of those drivers, of about 100, actually live in this district. So will you guys keep looking into that?
We could look into that.
All right, thank you.
Any questions online?
Yes, Dana Sifani, please unmute your microphone.
Sorry about that. Dana Chaffone, East Vincent Township. I just wanted to ask a question about the contingency and the policy around that. At what point in the budgeting cycle does the school board sit down and have a discussion around the 5% that's held for contingency and then the remainder being moved to the capital funding budget? Is there a process for that? And what factors does the school board, all of you directors, consider in deciding that potentially you would want to change the policy for a given year or even longer term?
I thought the
So I think it's
contingency was
1%
1%.
is the contingency.
Yeah, above.
And
Yeah,
then
I'm thinking-
that 1% is just moved over to the capital budget at the end of the year. So it's not necessarily decided upon, it just defaults based on the budget the actual expenditures versus the budget. And that's something that we could revisit, I think, if we looked at the history of how we do on that contingency, we could, amend that
Move
policy.
it someplace, or not move it to capital, or move it back into the general budget
Yeah.
or something like that?
It's our board
that-
policy, so I'm assuming we could change that any way we wanted to.
Right, and I can add that the board has done that in the past. So for example, if we were having a really rough budget year, for example, I can think of 2008, we've done it recently too, when we were having trouble making our revenues and expenditures balance reasonably. The board has waived portions of that policy in order to balance the budget.
Right, there's two pieces to this, right? There's the contingency that I guess you're saying the policy is to hold 5% because the budget is fluid, it's based on
It's 1%.
the 5% that's held in contingency, and then there's the 1 mil that's being moved over automatically. There's two different pieces to that, right? So what I'm questioning is, well, probably both, revisiting the policy. Obviously, we don't want our capital funding to tank, but, if you are in a particularly bad year, or we get to a point where we've replenished, to use that term that was just used, when what would trigger, like, you're looking at and revisiting that the excess above and beyond the 5% or the contingency that isn't used then automatically also gets moved over in addition to the 1 mil. So it's really like a two-part question. And when and why would you revisit it? What's your sort of trigger points for that? And when does the board discuss that as part of the budgeting cycle?
Okay, thanks for your question. I think that, Jackie, just clarify the 5%, 1% first. I think.
Sure, absolutely. 5%, it doesn't have anything to do with contingency. 5% is the amount that is retained on the general fund's fund balance. The state requires a cap of 8%. So the district is more conservative than that. We use 5%. So that is what must remain in undesignated fund balance. That there's no making that smaller or bigger because we're already below the state's 8% cap. So that's really not part of the discussion.
Okay.
The piece that I think you're talking about is the 1% contingency that's built into the budget annually. And then if that is not utilized, that is then per board policy transfers over to the capital fund. So that is either $1 million or zero, depending on the year.
Okay, so there's nothing above and beyond that you're saying. I see what you're saying, that there's a state requirement. I'm looking at the piece that might be discretionary, that would fund, if there is excess there, that it goes to capital. So that's what I'm questioning, how the board discusses that and what their, when do they discuss it and what sort of things would they factor into considering not moving it all to capital and keeping some of that, keeping it in the general fund? That would be the question then.
Okay, thanks for your question. And so nothing, it's the policy triggers it automatically at this point. And maybe that's something that we could look at the performance of that over the last 5 or 10 years and see if we want to make any adjustments there. So I think that's something I'd like to ask Jackie to, prepare us a little spreadsheet on that.
Didn't we waive it like 2 years ago during COVID? So 2 years ago, we did waive it,
Yeah, microphone.
Sorry. I'll repeat that. So when you did it 2 years ago during COVID, you amended that policy during the budget discussions that we're having right now as you were preparing for that next budget year. So we could amend that policy, I think, right now if we wanted to.
I think 2 years ago, we were just so scared. We said,
And I think it was waived rather than amended, so we didn't go and change the policy through an LNP procedure. We simply chose to waive that policy for that year, but left the policy as it was.
Mm-hmm.
That's correct.
Also, she's talking also about like this contingency of like, so say, for example, we have 1% of the budget and then the year ends and we didn't need any of that money. When does that get looked at? When do we see those final numbers and say, okay, what do we want to do? Or does it automatically move?
It's automatic per policy right now.
So we could choose to do something different with that, but I don't remember ever having a discussion of, this is how the year ended, kind of, you know? Do we get that discussion?
Yeah, so during the audit, we do, the Finance Committee does receive that information. And sometimes we have public meetings and we talk about it, and other times we disseminate the information. So it's been handled various ways throughout the years. However, the board would like us to discuss that. Is that, I'm going to make sure I'm answering you correctly.
Budget versus actual performance is in the board backup every meeting on a
Correct,
monthly
it is.
basis.
And
So
then we do
that's
have an
something you can
audit that
review.
occurs, for sure. And then the board receives that audit, and you
When do we
acknowledge
receive that?
receipt of that.
When is that?
So you received it in January. Sometimes you receive it in November, sometimes you receive it in January.
January, no, okay.
Yeah, and then we also do additional work with our financial statements in order to submit those financial statements to like peer-reviewed organizations, just to make sure that they're taking another look at it too. So those are the steps that we do take.
But the audit that we received in January, that wasn't this school year.
No.
It was the
No.
previous one. So
Previous.
we are always in the situation of having to pass a budget before we know what the school year that happened previous to that budget year total was, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
That is true. And we do provide, there is information that gives you some projected financial numbers now. So you have that in the backup. So we do take a look at where we are and project out to see, are we going to be using any of that million, or are we not? So you do have that information. And if you want us to review that in April, we're happy to do that, whatever information you would like.
Okay, thanks.
And so I think the steps would be, if that's something we want to look at, the Finance Committee would take a look at this information and then make a recommendation based on our review of it to the board at large to vote on if we wanted to amend or change that policy, correct?
I just want to be clear, if we do that, the purpose of that would be to offset the deficit, so we wouldn't have to basically, were we talking about keeping taxes increase at 0%? And is that what we're talking about doing, so we're not increasing taxes for, I mean, I'm just wondering why we would.
Well, I mean, it's really a safety, it's a little bit of a safety net for us, that 1% contingency, because a lot of our expenses are variable and we don't know, we get hit with, 4 feet of snow, then we're, underwater in that, or, extra kids go to charter schools, or, we're busing more kids. So we need a little bit of margin to work with on an operational level.
Right.
So if we had zero contingency, that would be a bad situation, because there'd be a good chance of us being negative some years, So, but and then to build too much of a margin, then that, hurts our taxpayers. So, I think, figuring out how much margin we need to keep to be safe and comfortable and to account for some of the unknowns is a smart move. But again, it's something we probably should, review. Maybe, if it's 1%, maybe it's 0.9%, or 1.2% would be more comfortable. I don't know. That's something we could, look into.
I just want to note, I mean, the 1.7, I'm looking at the bar graph right now, the 1.75 is less than the increase from last year. I mean, I think it's the third lowest tax increase according to this chart. So, I mean, I just want to make sure, is there still work that could be done to whittle that away even further? And I'm also worried, like, what's the worst case scenario? Could something push that back up between, there's a couple months between now and when we approve this budget, so.
Well, worst case scenario is a little hard to predict, because we were in March when COVID happened. So like, to me, that's a worst case scenario situation. So I will say, I feel more confident this year because we have 2 years of demonstrated revenue growth. So I do feel like we are incorporating the revenue growth that we're seeing into our budget, which is why you're seeing the taxes not be at 4% or higher. We're keeping the taxes as low as we can keep them, utilizing reasonable budget estimates. I don't feel that 1% is an egregious budget contingency either on a $125 million budget. Quite honestly, I'm just making that recommendation.
Yeah, Dan, I was just going to say, I was looking at the same thing, the 10-year trend, and you know, the 10-year trend here is 2.21%. So the proposal that we're at right now, and keep in mind, like Beth said earlier, that's down significantly from where we started a month or two ago. So we're always looking at, I wouldn't see this going up from the 1.75. And if you look historically, that's a pretty good number. And one thing that would concern me is if we, you know, there have been districts in the past that have opted to go with a 0, but then they end up with higher increases to make up for it down the road. So I think the approach that this district has taken with the slow and steady over the last 10 years seems to be the most prudent and make the most sense.
And if you think about, you know, inflation that we've seen over the last 12 months, you know, I think a 1.75 increase is amazing from a cost standpoint.
And I don't want to test your memory too much here, but do you recall in like the years 16, 17, 17, 18, what was going on back then that we had almost 3% tax increase? Was it something related to funding the pension or?
I don't, the big pension years are over. They've all been recently within the rate of inflation, I should say. I think when we struggle with revenue, that's when we have trouble balancing the budget. So for example, if we're seeing a significant number of tax appeals, or if there is just no movement with home sales, if we're not seeing that revenue growth, people moving in the district, building new homes, that is what hurts this school district. So that's my off the top of my head guess. I can go back and confirm that for you. Yeah, because recently we've seen, you know, increase in earned income tax, which, I mean, I told you last year I was surprised, but really it is indicative. We have a significant bedroom community, I'm going to call it, a work from home population here too, that we're benefiting from. So you're seeing those revenue increases being passed on, which helps mitigate the tax impact.
Yeah, I mean, it was a big jump from 15, 16, the 1.9, and then it went up 2.8 and then 2.95. I don't want to, I'd like to keep it as below 2% as we possibly can.
And I agree with you. That's always our goal. I mean, I've said that from the beginning, you know, as low as we can possibly keep it and steady so that we're not having big swings, you know.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of our formal presentations. Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, one more question.
Oh, sorry, one
from
more
Dana.
question.
Dana, please unmute again.
Mr. Phone, do you have another question? You can unmute.
Sorry about that. I can't find unmute. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. I wasn't suggesting in any way that this be looked at for this year. With the 1.7% increase, I'm just asking more globally about the policy. When was the last time we looked at that? You know, it's this automatic movement of any, call it excess. I'm sorry if I'm not getting the right terms, but I'm just looking at it more broadly from the perspective of the policy and not saying that you should do it this year, given where we are in the budget. So I just wanted to clarify what I'm asking about. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we said that, you know, we asked Ms. Crumrine to put together some performance data for us, and that's something we can look at now, and we don't have to change the policy now. We can just decide, you know, what to do with that data once we see it. Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Finance, Budget, Buildings, Grounds Committee? All right, thank you. This meeting's adjourned.